49. Baby found mother bear. Had built secret hospital and cave for emergencies. Everyone was in tears. The morning mist hung low over the pine forest, creating ghostly shapes between the ancient trees that seemed to dance with each breath of wind. Ethan Marshall adjusted his ranger hat against the early September chill, his boots crunching through the carpet of fallen needles that had accumulated over countless seasons. He had walked these trails for 15 years, knew every creek bed, every hollow log, every eagle's nest perched high in the towering evergreens. But something felt different today. The forest held its breath in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the sensation you get when you know you're about to witness something that will change everything you thought you knew about the world. The radio on his belt crackled with static, then went silent again. Cell towers didn't reach this deep into the wilderness, which was exactly how Ethan preferred it most days. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, nature still ruled supreme. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, they all called this place home, and Ethan had learned to read their signs like a language written in broken branches and disturbed earth. That's why the tracks he found near Miller's Creek that morning made him stop in his tracks. They were bear prints, massive ones belonging to what had to be a female grizzly of considerable size, but there was something odd about the pattern. The bear wasn't moving in the typical foraging pattern or the direct line of a predator on the hunt. Instead, the tracks showed hesitation, careful placement, almost as if the animal was carrying something precious and didn't want to drop it. Following the trail led him deeper into a part of the forest he rarely patrolled, where the trees grew so thick that even at midday, only scattered beams of sunlight penetrated the canopy. The tracks became fresher, the mud still soft around the edges where the bear's weight had pressed down. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was crying. Not the cry of an animal, but unmistakably human. A baby's wail echoed through the trees, weak but persistent, coming from somewhere ahead where the tracks disappeared into a cluster of massive boulders that formed a natural cave system. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the bear spray on his belt, though he knew it would be useless if a mother grizzly decided to charge. Protocol demanded he call for backup, wait for the wildlife response team, follow proper procedures. But that crying, it pulled at something deep in his chest. A baby out here meant someone was in serious trouble. Hikers went missing in these woods every year, and sometimes they had children with them. Moving as quietly as his training allowed, he approached the cave entrance, every muscle tensed for the possibility of confrontation with one of nature's most formidable predators. What he saw when he peered around the edge of the boulder made him question his sanity. Inside the cave, illuminated by shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the rock ceiling, was indeed a massive grizzly bear. But she wasn't acting like any bear Ethan had ever encountered in his career. She was sitting upright, almost human-like in her posture, and in her enormous paws she held a bundle of dirty blankets. The crying was coming from within those blankets. As Ethan watched, frozen in disbelief, the bear gently rocked the bundle, making soft huffing sounds that seemed intended to soothe. Her movements were deliberate, careful, nothing like the powerful, sometimes clumsy motions bears typically displayed. The cave itself defied explanation. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Ethan could make out details that shouldn't exist. Along one wall, arranged with obvious purpose, were supplies. Actual human supplies. Bandages still in their packaging, bottles of water, canned goods, even what appeared to be antibiotics in their distinctive orange prescription bottles. Everything was organized, sorted by type, placed on natural rock shelves as if someone had been stockpiling medical supplies. But that was impossible. Bears didn't collect things like this. They didn't organize. They certainly didn't create what looked like a makeshift medical station in the middle of the wilderness. The baby's crying grew weaker, and the bear's attention became more focused. She set the bundle down gently on what Ethan now realized was a bed made of pine needles and moss, surprisingly clean and well-maintained. Then she did something that made him grip the rock so hard his knuckles went white. The bear reached for one of the water bottles, used her teeth to carefully twist off the cap, and poured a small amount onto what looked like a torn piece of clean cloth. She began dabbing at the baby's face with movements so gentle, so precisely human-like, that Ethan had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating from dehydration or altitude sickness. The bear's massive head turned slightly, and for one heart-stopping moment Ethan thought she had detected him. But her attention returned to the infant, and she continued her ministrations. The baby had stopped crying now, seemingly calmed by the bear's attention. Ethan could see tiny fingers poking out from the blankets, reaching up toward the bear's snout. The bear lowered her head, allowing the baby to touch her, and made a low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl. It was almost like a lullaby, rhythmic and soothing. Ethan's mind raced to make sense of what he was witnessing. In all his years as a ranger, in all the wildlife biology courses he'd taken, nothing had prepared him for this. Bears were intelligent, yes. They could use tools in simple ways, had excellent memories, and could problem-solve to get food. But this level of care, this apparent understanding of human medical needs, this organized collection of supplies, it challenged everything science said about animal behavior. Yet here it was, happening right in front of him. The bear moved to another part of the cave, and Ethan shifted position to maintain his view. She approached what looked like a natural spring that bubbled up from the rock floor, creating a small pool of clear water. Using the same careful movements, she soaked another cloth and returned to the baby. This time, she placed the cool cloth on the infant's forehead, a gesture so specifically aimed at reducing fever that Ethan felt his scientific skepticism crumbling. How could a bear know to do that? How could she understand that a human baby with fever needed cooling? As he continued to observe, more details of the cave became apparent. There were markings on the walls, not random scratches, but what looked like deliberate tallies, counting something. Near these marks were items that made Ethan's breath catch. A child's shoe, weathered but carefully placed, a small teddy bear, missing an eye but positioned like a shrine, a water-damaged photograph that he couldn't quite make out from his hiding spot. Each item seemed to tell a story, and the way they were arranged suggested reverence, memory, purpose. The baby made a small sound, not quite crying but clearly expressing need. The bear's response was immediate. She moved to her collection of supplies and selected a can of what appeared to be infant formula. Ethan watched in stunned silence as she used her claw with surgical precision to puncture the can, then tilted it carefully to drip the contents into the baby's mouth. The infant drank eagerly, tiny hands grasping at the can while the bear supported the baby's head with her other paw, maintaining the perfect angle for feeding. This went on for several minutes, the bear patient and attentive, stopping when the baby needed to breathe, resuming when the infant showed signs of wanting more. When the feeding was complete, the bear did something that brought tears to Ethan's eyes. She lifted the baby to her shoulder, exactly as a human would, and gently patted the small back with her paw. The baby burped, and the bear made that rumbling sound again, almost like approval or satisfaction. Ethan knew he needed to document this, but he didn't dare reach for his phone or camera. Any sudden movement might break this spell, might cause the bear to react defensively. Instead, he committed every detail to memory, knowing that even if he told this story exactly as it happened, few would believe him without proof. Yet, what mattered more than proof was the baby's safety, and right now, incredibly, the infant seemed safer with this bear than it might have been alone in the wilderness. The bear settled back into a sitting position, cradling the baby against her chest. Her fur would provide warmth, Ethan realized, crucial for a small infant in the cool cave environment. The baby's breathing had steadied, no longer the labored sound from earlier. One tiny hand had found its way out of the blankets and was gripping the bear's fur, holding on with that instinctive grasp reflex all human babies possessed. The bear looked down at the small hand and made a sound Ethan had never heard from a bear before. Soft, almost like a sigh of contentment or perhaps sadness. Time seemed to stop in the cave. Ethan's legs were beginning to cramp from maintaining his position, but he didn't dare move. He watched as the bear occasionally checked on the baby, adjusting the blankets, testing the temperature of the infant's skin with her nose, all while maintaining that gentle rocking motion. It was maternal behavior, pure and simple, but expressed by a creature that should have seen this human infant as either irrelevant or possibly even as prey. The sun had shifted, changing the light patterns in the cave, when Ethan heard something that made his heart race. Footsteps. Human footsteps, coming from the opposite direction. Someone was approaching the cave from the other side. The bear heard it too. Her head snapped up, ears alert, but she didn't growl or show aggression. Instead, she carefully laid the baby in the makeshift bed and moved toward the back of the cave, positioning herself where she could watch but wasn't immediately visible. A woman stumbled into view at the far entrance of the cave. She was disheveled, her clothing torn, with scratches on her arms and face that suggested she'd been pushing through thick brush. Her ranger uniform identified her as Jessica Brooks, the veterinarian who worked with the Park Service. Ethan recognized her from interdepartment meetings, though they'd never worked together directly. She was breathing hard, clearly exhausted, but her eyes were sharp with purpose. Jessica stopped at the cave entrance, her hand going to her radio, then dropping when she realized, as Ethan had, that there was no signal here. She took a step into the cave, then froze. She'd seen the baby. Her gasp echoed off the rock walls as she rushed forward, then stopped again, noticing the supplies, the organization, the impossibility of what she was seeing. Her training as a veterinarian would be telling her the same thing Ethan's experience was telling him. This shouldn't be possible. "Hello," Jessica called out softly, perhaps thinking another human was nearby. "Is someone here?" "I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help." The bear remained hidden, watching. Ethan could see her from his angle, could see the way she observed Jessica's every movement. Jessica approached the baby slowly, clearly confused by the situation but focused on the infant's well-being. She knelt beside the makeshift bed, her hands moving professionally as she checked the baby's vital signs. Her expression shifted from confusion to amazement as she realized the infant was in relatively good condition, clean, fed, and showing no signs of severe exposure or dehydration. "How is this possible?" Jessica whispered to herself, looking around the cave with growing wonder. Her eyes tracked over the supplies, the organization, the evidence of deliberate care. "Someone's been taking care of you, haven't they, little one?" The baby gurgled in response, reaching for Jessica's face. She picked up the infant carefully, her movements showing she was comfortable with children despite being a veterinarian. As she cradled the baby, she noticed the same things Ethan had. The tallies on the wall, the shrine-like arrangement of items, the medical supplies that no hiker would have been carrying in such quantities. "This doesn't make sense," she said aloud, speaking to the baby as if the infant could provide answers. "These supplies, some of them are expired by years. Someone's been collecting them for a long time, but who would live out here and why?" Ethan watched as Jessica discovered the photograph he'd noticed earlier. She picked it up carefully, studying it in the beam of sunlight. Her face went pale, and she quickly pulled out her phone, not to make a call, but to look at something saved on it. She held the phone next to the photograph, comparing them. "Oh my God," she breathed. "This is the Mitchell family." They went missing 3 years ago. Their car was found at the bottom of a ravine, but the baby was never found, everyone assumed. She trailed off, looking at the photograph again. But this photo was in their car. How did it get here? The bear shifted slightly in her hiding spot, and a small rock tumbled. Jessica's head snapped toward the sound, her body tensing. She held the baby closer, protective instinct overriding her scientific curiosity. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice stronger now. "I know someone's here. Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just trying to understand what's happening." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, the bear emerged from the shadows. Jessica's sharp intake of breath was audible throughout the cave. She took an instinctive step backward, clutching the baby, but the bear made no aggressive moves. Instead, she sat down where she was, in full view but at a respectful distance, and made that same low rumbling sound she'd made for the baby. That's impossible," Jessica whispered, her scientific mind warring with what her eyes were seeing. The bear's posture was non-threatening, almost submissive. Her eyes, and Ethan could see them clearly now, held an intelligence that seemed almost human in its depth. You've been taking care of this baby?" The bear didn't move, just continued that rumbling sound. Jessica, showing either incredible bravery or professional curiosity overcoming fear, took a small step forward. The bear still didn't react aggressively. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost like an invitation to understand. "The supplies," Jessica said slowly, as if working through a complex problem. "You've been collecting them. From hikers? From campsites?" She looked around the cave again with new understanding. "This isn't the first time, is it? You've done this before. The Mitchell baby, did you? ? The bear moved then, but not toward Jessica. She went to the wall with the tallies and placed her paw beneath them, a gesture so deliberate it couldn't be misinterpreted. She was showing Jessica, telling her without words that yes, there had been others. Many others. Jessica sank to her knees, still holding the baby but no longer out of fear. Tears were streaming down her face. "How many?" she asked the bear, as if expecting an answer. "How many have you saved?" The bear moved to the shrine-like arrangement of items. With careful movements, she touched the child's shoe, then the teddy bear, then several other items Ethan hadn't been able to identify from his position. Each touch was gentle, reverent, and Jessica seemed to understand. Each item represented a child, a life saved, a story of survival that shouldn't have been possible. "But why?" Jessica asked, her voice breaking. How did you learn?" The bear's response was to move toward a far corner of the cave that Ethan couldn't see clearly. She returned, carrying something in her mouth, placing it gently at Jessica's feet. It was a collar. A small collar, the kind that might be put on a dog, but the size suggested something else. As Jessica picked it up, her face changed to one of recognition. "This is a research collar," she said slowly. "For bear cubs. We use them to track." She looked up at the bear with sudden understanding. "You were one of our research subjects?" Years ago, your cubs were collared for a mortality study, but the record showed they died. Poachers, wasn't it? They killed your cubs for their gallbladders and paws. The bear made a different sound now, mournful and deep. She touched the collar with her paw, then gestured toward the baby in Jessica's arms. The connection was clear, even if the full explanation defied logic. This bear had lost her own cubs to human cruelty, yet here she was, saving human children with a dedication that transcended species boundaries. Jessica set the baby down carefully in the bed of pine needles, making sure the infant was secure. Then she did something that made Ethan hold his breath. She approached the bear slowly, her hand extended. The bear didn't move, allowing Jessica to come close, to place her hand on the massive head. For a moment, two mothers, one human, one ursine, shared a connection that needed no words. "I need to get this baby to a hospital," Jessica said finally, stepping back. "But I promise you, I promise, no one will hurt you. No one will take this place from you. You're doing something incredible here, something that changes everything we thought we knew." The bear moved back to the baby, nuzzling the infant gently with her nose. The baby laughed, actually laughed, and grabbed at the bear's fur. The bear made that rumbling sound again, then carefully stepped back, giving Jessica permission to take the child. As Jessica prepared to leave with the baby, wrapping the infant more securely in the blankets, she turned back to the bear. "I'll come back," she said. "Not with hunters or scientists who want to study you. Just me, to help if you'll let me, to bring supplies that aren't expired, to make sure you have what you need to keep doing this amazing thing." The bear tilted her head, that gesture of understanding, and then did something that would stay with both hidden and visible witnesses forever. She stood on her hind legs, towering over Jessica but not threateningly, and placed one paw over her chest, right where her heart would be. It was a gesture so human, so full of meaning, that Jessica broke down completely, sobbing while holding the baby. "I understand," Jessica managed to say through her tears. "Your babies for our babies. You're healing your loss by saving others. It's beautiful." The bear dropped back to all fours and retreated deeper into the cave, disappearing into the shadows. Jessica stood there for a moment longer, clearly struggling to leave, to process what she'd witnessed. Finally, she turned and headed for the cave entrance, the baby secure in her arms. Ethan waited until Jessica was gone, then carefully extracted himself from his hiding spot. His legs protested as he stood, muscles cramped from maintaining his position for so long. He didn't enter the cave. That felt like it would be a violation of something sacred. Instead, he memorized every detail he could see from the entrance, then began the long trek back to his station. His mind was spinning with the implications of what he'd witnessed. This would change everything. Wildlife management, animal behavior studies, our entire understanding of interspecies empathy and intelligence. But more than that, it was a story of redemption, of love transcending the boundaries that nature had supposedly set in stone. A bear who had lost everything to human cruelty had chosen to respond not with vengeance, but with compassion, saving the most vulnerable of the species that had taken her own children. As he walked through the forest, Ethan found himself thinking about all the missing hiker reports he'd filed over the years, particularly those involving children. How many had actually been found by this bear? How many families had gotten their children back without ever knowing the true story of their survival? The tallies on the cave wall suggested dozens, possibly accumulated over many years. Each mark a life saved, a family reunited, a tragedy averted by a creature operating outside every known parameter of animal behavior. The sun was setting by the time Ethan reached his station. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank incident report form on his computer screen. How could he possibly document this in a way that would be believed? How could he protect the bear while ensuring she got the support she clearly needed for her mission? He thought about Jessica's promise to return with supplies, and he knew he would be doing the same. Not as a ranger, but as a human being who had witnessed something that transcended job descriptions and scientific understanding. He began typing, choosing his words carefully. He reported finding tracks, investigating a cave, discovering evidence of a bear with unusual behavior patterns that warranted further study and protection. He recommended the immediate area be closed to hiking and camping, citing potential wildlife hazards that required assessment. It wasn't the whole truth, but it would buy time, create a buffer zone around the cave, while he and Jessica figured out how to help without destroying the miracle they'd discovered. As night fell over the forest, Ethan thought about the bear, alone in her cave with her collected supplies and memories. He wondered how many nights she'd spent preparing for the next lost soul she might find, organizing her medical supplies, maintaining her sanctuary. The dedication required was staggering. Bears typically spent their time foraging, preparing for hibernation, raising cubs when they had them. This bear had replaced those natural drives with something else entirely, a purpose that seemed almost spiritual in its devotion. He pulled up the old files on bear research programs from 15 to 20 years ago. If Jessica was right about the collar, there would be records. It took hours of searching through digitized archives, but finally he found it. A female grizzly, tagged as F47, had been part of a reproductive study. She'd had 2 cubs, both collared, both killed by poachers when they were just 6 months old. The mother had disappeared after that, presumed to have left the area. The researchers' notes mentioned that F47 had shown unusual intelligence during the study, solving problems faster than other bears, showing what they described as almost human-like reasoning capabilities. The timeline fit. If F47 was the bear in the cave, she would be about 20 years old now, middle-aged for a grizzly, but still capable of many more years of life. 20 years of saving children, of building her sanctuary, of turning her grief into something unprecedented in the natural world. Ethan printed the file, adding it to a folder he was creating. Not an official file, but a personal one. Documentation for himself and Jessica, and maybe someday, when the world was ready, for everyone. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Baby is stable at the hospital. Parents have been located. They were injured in a car accident 2 days ago. Thought baby was dead. Can't explain how baby survived and got to that cave. Need to talk. Can you meet tomorrow? Ethan responded immediately, agreeing to meet. They had much to discuss, plans to make. The bear needed protection. But more than that, she needed support for her chosen mission. If she was going to continue saving lives, they could help her do it more effectively. Fresh medical supplies, proper nutrition for infants, maybe even a way to alert her when someone was lost in her territory. The possibilities were endless, but they had to be careful. The wrong kind of attention could destroy everything. As he prepared to leave the station for the night, Ethan took one last look at the map on his wall. He found the area where the cave was located and marked it with a small pin. Nothing that would draw attention, just a reminder for himself. Somewhere out there in the darkness of the forest, a bear was keeping watch, ready to be the guardian angel that lost children needed. It was a secret that weighed heavily on him, but also filled him with a hope he hadn't felt in years. The next morning came gray and misty, the forest wrapped in a blanket of fog that made everything look dreamlike and unreal. Ethan met Jessica at a small cafe in town, choosing a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. She looked exhausted, but also exhilarated, the expression of someone whose entire worldview had been shaken and reformed. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I kept thinking about what we saw. It challenges everything I learned in veterinary school, everything I thought I knew about animal cognition and behavior." Ethan nodded, pulling out the file he'd compiled. "I found her records. If I'm right, she's been doing this for almost 2 decades. The bear you met yesterday lost her cubs to poachers when they were just babies. After that, she disappeared from our tracking systems." Jessica studied the files, her expression growing more amazed with each page. The intelligence markers were off the charts even then, but this, what she's become, its evolution happening right in front of us. Not physical evolution, but behavioral, emotional, perhaps even spiritual evolution. They spent hours discussing what to do. Jessica had already filed her report about finding the baby, claiming she'd discovered the infant in a cave while following up on the missing persons alert. She'd mentioned evidence of animal care, but had been vague about the details, buying them time just as Ethan had. They agreed to return to the cave separately over the coming days, bringing supplies that could actually help: proper infant formula, unexpired medications, clean blankets, and medical equipment that the bear could potentially use. "We're probably breaking a dozen regulations," Jessica said at one point, but she was smiling. "Interfering with wildlife, providing unnatural food sources, potentially creating dangerous dependencies." "She's already beyond natural," Ethan countered. "What she's doing transcends wildlife management protocols. We're not dealing with a typical bear anymore. We're dealing with something new, something that doesn't fit into our neat categories." They agreed to keep detailed records of their own, documenting everything they observed, every interaction, every life saved. Someday, when the time was right, the world would need to know this story. But for now, their priority was protecting the bear and supporting her mission. Over the following weeks, they established a careful routine. They would visit the cave when they knew the bear was away foraging, leaving supplies in a designated spot. They never took anything, never disturbed her arrangements, just added to her resources. Sometimes they would find evidence of new rescues, fresh tallies on the wall, new items added to the shrine. Each one represented a story they might never fully know, a life saved by a creature operating outside the boundaries of nature as we understood it. Jessica began researching similar cases worldwide, looking for any precedent for this level of interspecies caregiving. She found scattered reports: dolphins saving drowning humans, elephants protecting lost children, even a case of a wolf pack that had apparently raised a human child for several years. But nothing matched the deliberate, sustained, medically informed care that their bear was providing. She was unique, or at least uniquely documented. One evening, about a month after their first encounter, Ethan was doing a late patrol when he heard voices near the cave area. His heart sank. Had someone else discovered the secret? He approached carefully, ready to intervene if necessary to protect the bear. But as he got closer, he realized the voices were young, scared, children. He found them just outside the cave, 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old, huddled together and crying. They were clearly lost, had been for at least a day, judging by their condition. Ethan was about to reveal himself, to radio for help, when he saw movement in the shadows. The bear emerged slowly, carefully, making no sudden movements that might frighten the children further. What happened next was extraordinary, even by the standards of what Ethan had already witnessed. The bear approached the children with a piece of fabric in her mouth, a blanket from her supplies. She set it down near them, then retreated a few steps, sitting down in a non-threatening posture. The older child, a boy, stopped crying and stared at the bear in amazement rather than fear. "It's okay, Sarah," the boy told his sister. I think she wants to help us." The bear made that familiar rumbling sound, soothing and rhythmic. She pushed the blanket closer with her paw, then moved to her cave, clearly inviting them to follow. The children, showing either remarkable bravery or the trust that comes with desperation, stood up and followed the bear into the cave. Ethan watched from his hiding spot as the bear provided water, food from her supplies, and warm blankets for the children. She checked them for injuries with the same gentle attention he'd seen her give to the baby. The children, initially fearful, gradually relaxed as they realized this impossible creature meant them no harm. Within an hour, they were sleeping peacefully in the cave, the bear keeping watch at the entrance. Ethan quietly radioed for a search team, giving them coordinates close to but not exactly at the cave. He would find the children in the morning, another miraculous rescue that would be attributed to luck rather than the intervention of a grieving mother bear who had turned her loss into a mission of mercy. As he watched through the night, ensuring the children's safety, Ethan thought about the interconnectedness of all life, about the capacity for love and compassion that transcended species boundaries. This bear had taken the worst tragedy imaginable, the loss of her children, and transformed it into something beautiful and life-affirming. She had become more than an animal, more than even the sum of her remarkable behaviors. She had become a guardian, a healer, a bridge between the human and natural worlds. The children were rescued the next morning, found by Ethan exactly where he'd said they would be, with a story of sheltering in a cave and being kept warm by what they insisted was a nice bear who had given them food and blankets. The adults smiled at what they assumed was childhood imagination mixing with the trauma of being lost. Only Ethan and Jessica knew the truth. As autumn progressed toward winter, they worried about the bear's hibernation. Would she abandon her post for the necessary months of sleep? But she surprised them again. She modified her behavior, entering a state of semi-hibernation where she would sleep for days at a time, but remain alert enough to respond to anyone who might need help. Jessica researched this and found it wasn't entirely unprecedented. Mother bears with cubs sometimes exhibited similar patterns, maintaining enough wakefulness to protect their young. "She's treating the entire forest like her den," Jessica explained to Ethan during one of their meetings. "And any human child who enters it becomes, in her mind, one of her cubs to protect." They decided to increase their supply drops before winter, ensuring she had enough resources to last through the cold months. They included high-calorie foods that would help her maintain her energy during her modified hibernation, as well as winter-specific supplies for any potential human rescues. Warmer blankets, heating packets, insulated clothing in various sizes. The first snow of the season was falling when Ethan made what would be his last supply run before the deep winter set in. As he approached the cave, he was surprised to find the bear waiting for him. She had never directly confronted him before, though he'd suspected she knew about his visits. She sat at the cave entrance, watching him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding no animal should possess. Ethan set down his supplies slowly, maintaining eye contact with the bear. "I know you know we've been helping," he said softly, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to her. "We just want to support what you're doing. It's important. You're important." The bear stood and approached him. Ethan's training told him to back away, to never let a grizzly get this close, but something in the bear's demeanor kept him rooted in place. She stopped just out of arm's reach and did something that would stay with him forever. She bowed her head, a gesture so clearly one of gratitude that it brought tears to his eyes. Then she turned and walked back to her cave, pausing at the entrance to look back at him one more time before disappearing inside. Winter came hard and fast that year, blanketing the forest in deep snow and making many trails impassable. Ethan and Jessica worried constantly about the bear and whether anyone lost in such conditions could even reach her cave. But nature has its ways of creating paths for those who need them. 3 times that winter they received reports of missing persons who were found in remarkably good condition despite having been lost in the frozen wilderness. Each time, the survivors mentioned finding shelter in a cave, being provided with warmth and food, though their descriptions of how this happened were vague, dreamlike, as if the cold had affected their memories. Spring arrived with its usual mixture of melting snow and new growth, and with it came a development neither Ethan nor Jessica had anticipated. The bear emerged from her winter semi-hibernation with a companion, another bear, younger, who followed her with the devotion of a student following a master. They watched in amazement, as the older bear seemed to be teaching the younger one, showing her the supplies, demonstrating the gentle techniques needed to handle human infants and children. "She's passing it on," Jessica breathed in wonder when Ethan shared what he'd observed. "She's ensuring that when she's gone, someone will continue the work." This isn't just individual behavior anymore. It's becoming a culture, a tradition passed from one generation to the next. They realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in the study of animal behavior, the deliberate transmission of complex altruistic behavior from one animal to another, behavior that served no evolutionary purpose in the traditional sense but spoke to something deeper, something that suggested consciousness and purpose beyond mere survival. As spring turned to summer, more bears began appearing at the cave. Not many, just 2 or 3, all female, all showing the same careful, intelligent behavior as the original bear. She was teaching them, creating a network of guardians throughout the forest. Each bear would eventually establish her own sanctuary, her own collection of supplies, her own territory to watch over. The impact became noticeable in the park's statistics. Missing hiker cases that previously might have ended in tragedy were increasingly resulting in miraculous rescues. Children, especially, seemed to have an uncanny ability to survive situations that should have been fatal. The Park Service attributed it to improved search and rescue techniques, better equipment, luck. Only Ethan and Jessica knew the truth, that the forest itself had developed a safety net, a living system of guardians who watched over the most vulnerable. One day, in late summer, Jessica brought news that would change everything. "There's a wildlife documentary team that wants to film in the park. They're particularly interested in bear behavior. We need to find a way to redirect them away from the cave areas." They spent weeks carefully crafting diversions, creating interesting but harmless bear observation opportunities in other parts of the park. But fate has a way of intervening in the best laid plans. The documentary team's lead researcher, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, was too good at her job. She noticed the patterns in the rescue statistics, the geographical clustering of survival stories, the subtle signs that something unusual was happening in certain parts of the forest. Dr. Sarah Chen was not someone who gave up easily when she sensed a story worth telling. She had spent 20 years documenting wildlife behavior around the world, from the Arctic tundra to the Amazon rainforest, and she had developed an instinct for when something extraordinary was happening. The patterns she noticed in the park's rescue statistics were too consistent to be coincidental, too localized to be random. She set up her base camp strategically, not where Ethan and Jessica had tried to direct her, but in a location that gave her access to the areas where most of the miraculous rescues had occurred. It was Lily Morgan who would become the unexpected bridge between worlds. The young journalist had arrived at the park following up on a human interest story about the dramatic increase in successful search and rescue operations. She was particularly interested in the cases involving children, having noticed that the survival rate for lost children in this particular forest was statistically impossible when compared to national averages. Her investigation led her to interview dozens of families whose children had been rescued, and she began to notice recurring elements in their stories. Mentions of caves, of being kept warm, of food appearing when needed, and, most tellingly, several children's insistence that a big furry friend had helped them. Lily's path crossed with Dr. Chen's when both women ended up at the same ranger station on the same morning, both asking questions that made Ethan increasingly uncomfortable. He tried to deflect, to give them the standard explanations about improved techniques and lucky circumstances, but both women were too sharp to be satisfied with vague answers. They compared notes over coffee at the station, and within an hour, they had identified the geographical center of the unusual activity. There's something happening here that goes beyond normal animal behavior, Dr. Chen said, studying the map she'd marked with rescue locations. The pattern suggests deliberate intervention, not random encounters. Lily pulled out her notebook, filled with quotes from the children she'd interviewed. "Listen to this," she said, reading from her notes. 8-year-old Tommy Caldwell said, "The bear lady gave me medicine that tasted bad but made my tummy feel better." His parents thought he was hallucinating from fever, but what if he wasn't? Their conversation was interrupted by an emergency call crackling over the radio. A family had reported their 5-year-old daughter missing. She had wandered away from their campsite during the night, and with the temperature dropping and rain forecast, the situation was becoming critical. Ethan immediately organized search teams, his heart sinking as he realized the search area included the cave system where the bears operated. Dr. Chen and Lily volunteered to join the search, and Ethan couldn't refuse their help without raising suspicions. He assigned them to a sector that he hoped would keep them away from the cave, but as the hours passed with no sign of the child, the search expanded. The rain had started, a cold drizzle that would quickly become dangerous for a small child. Ethan found himself torn between his duty to protect the bear's secret and his desperate hope that they would find and save the little girl. It was Jessica who made the decision that would change everything. She had been searching near the cave system when she heard it, a child crying, the sound echoing off the rocks in a way that made it hard to pinpoint the location. She followed the sound and found herself at a secondary entrance to the cave network, one she hadn't known existed. Inside, illuminated by the pale morning light, she saw a scene that made her gasp. Not one, but 3 bears were present, all focused on a small figure lying on a bed of pine needles. The little girl was clearly sick, burning with fever, her breathing labored. The original bear, the one Ethan had first observed, was applying cool compresses to the child's forehead while one of her students held the girl steady. The third bear was sorting through medical supplies, selecting what looked like children's fever reducer. The level of coordination, the obvious communication between the bears, the sophisticated understanding of human medical needs, it was beyond anything Jessica had imagined possible. She made a choice in that moment, pulling out her radio. "I've found her," she announced, giving coordinates that would bring the search teams to the cave. "She needs immediate medical attention. Approach slowly and quietly. There's wildlife present, but they're not threatening." Within minutes, Ethan arrived, followed closely by Dr. Chen and Lily. The expression on their faces when they saw the scene inside the cave was one Jessica would never forget. A mixture of disbelief, wonder, and the dawning realization that they were witnessing something that would redefine humanity's understanding of animal intelligence and empathy. The bears didn't flee when the humans entered. The original bear looked up, making eye contact with Jessica, and in that gaze was a question and a trust. Jessica approached slowly, her hands visible and empty. "We're here to help," she said softly. "All of us. We want to help you help her." What followed was a collaboration that none of them could have imagined. Dr. Chen, overcoming her initial shock, began documenting the scene with a small camera, her movements careful and non-threatening. Lily helped Jessica approach the child, while Ethan coordinated with the arriving medical team, preparing them for what they were about to see. The bears stepped back, but didn't leave, watching as the paramedics began treating the little girl. The child was severely dehydrated and had developed pneumonia, but the bear's intervention had likely saved her life. The cool compresses had kept her fever from reaching dangerous levels, and they had managed to get some fluids into her. As the paramedics worked, one of them, a young man named David, looked at the bears with tears in his eyes. "They knew exactly what to do," he said. "The placement of the compresses, the elevation of her head to help her breathe. This isn't instinct. This is learned medical knowledge." Dr. Chen was filming everything, her camera capturing not just the immediate rescue but the cave itself. The organized supplies, the tallies on the walls, the shrine of rescued children's belongings. She turned to the original bear, who was watching the paramedics work with obvious concern. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, not expecting an answer but needing to voice the question. The bear moved to the wall with the tallies, placing her paw beneath them in the same gesture she had shown Jessica months earlier. Dr. Chen counted quickly. There were over 60 marks, each representing a life saved. Some were grouped together, suggesting multiple rescues from the same incident. The earliest marks were weathered, years old, while the newest were fresh. Lily was interviewing the paramedics, getting their professional assessment of what the bears had done. Their responses would later become crucial testimony to the authenticity of what was being discovered. "No training in the world explains this," David said. "They understood inflammation, fever reduction, hydration needs. They even positioned her to prevent aspiration. These bears are practicing medicine." As the little girl was stabilized and prepared for transport, her eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused and frightened, until her gaze landed on the original bear. Instead of screaming or showing fear, she reached out her small hand. "Thank you, Bear Mommy," she whispered. The bear approached slowly, gently touching the child's hand with her nose before stepping back to allow the paramedics to continue their work. It was a moment of connection that transcended species, captured forever on Dr. Chen's camera and in the hearts of everyone present. After the child was evacuated to the hospital, the group remained in the cave, trying to process what they had witnessed. Dr. Chen was the first to speak. "This changes everything we thought we knew about animal cognition. This isn't just tool use or problem solving, this is empathy manifested as medical intervention, sustained over years, taught to others. It's culture, medicine, and compassion combined in a way we've never documented in non-human species." Lily was already composing her story in her head, knowing she was sitting on what would become the most important piece of journalism in her career. But she also understood the responsibility that came with this knowledge. If this gets out the wrong way, this place will be overrun. These bears will become specimens, curiosities. We could destroy the very thing we're trying to document. Ethan finally told them everything. His months of observation, the supply runs he and Jessica had been making, the network of guardian bears that was developing throughout the forest. He showed them the research he'd compiled, the connection to the bears' lost cubs, the transformation of grief into purpose that had started it all. "She lost her babies to human cruelty," Jessica added, "and she responded by saving human babies. It's not just intelligence we're looking at here. It's forgiveness, transformation, a kind of grace we don't usually associate with wild animals. Dr. Chen lowered her camera, her expression thoughtful. I've documented hundreds of species, shown the world amazing animal behaviors. But this is sacred. This is a story that needs to be told, but told right. Not as a sensation, but as a testament to what's possible when we recognize that humans aren't the only species capable of profound emotional and moral development. They spent hours in the cave, documenting everything with the bear's apparent permission. The animals seemed to understand that their secret was out, but also seemed to trust these particular humans with their story. The original bear even showed them things they hadn't discovered before, a hidden chamber where she kept medical supplies organized by expiration date. Another area where she had created picture cards showing human children in various states of distress, apparently used to teach the younger bears what to look for. She's created a teaching system, Doctor. Chen marveled. Visual aids for bear medical students. This is deliberate knowledge transfer, systematic education. It's unprecedented. As the day wore on, more bears arrived at the cave. Word had somehow spread through the forest that something important was happening. 7 bears in total gathered, all female, all showing the same calm, intelligent demeanor. They arranged themselves in what looked like a deliberate formation, the original bear at the center, the others around, her like students or disciples. Lily interviewed Ethan and Jessica extensively, getting the full story from the beginning. She learned about the Mitchell baby from 3 years ago, about the numerous children who had been saved without anyone knowing the true story of their rescue. Each tale added another layer to the incredible narrative that was emerging. What strikes me most, Jessica said during her interview, is the deliberate choice to help despite having every reason to hate humans. These bears have all lost cubs to hunting, poaching, or habitat destruction. Yet they've chosen to become protectors of human young. It's a level of moral evolution that honestly makes me question whether humans would be capable of the same if our positions were reversed. Dr. Chen had a different perspective. From a behavioral evolution standpoint, this represents something entirely new. These bears aren't acting on instinct or even learned behavior in the traditional sense. They're making conscious choices based on empathy and a complex understanding of mortality, loss, and redemption. They're essentially practicing interspecies adoption on a massive scale. As evening approached, they had to make decisions about how to proceed. The little girl's rescue would make news, and questions would be asked. They agreed to meet the next day to develop a plan that would protect the bears while allowing their story to be told. Dr. Chen would need to consult with her production team, Lily with her editors, and Ethan and Jessica with park management. Before they left, the original bear did something remarkable. She approached each human individually, making eye contact, touching them gently with her paw, a gesture that felt unmistakably like a blessing, or perhaps a passing of responsibility. When she reached Lily, she paused longer, then moved to one of her shrine items and brought it to the journalist. A small notebook, water-damaged but intact. Lily opened it carefully. Inside were pages of writing. A child's handwriting. It was a diary, kept by someone during days of being lost. The entries described being found by a bear, being cared for, being saved. The last entry, dated 5 years ago, ended with, "The bear mom says I have to go back now. She taught me that being different doesn't mean being scary. I hope someday everyone knows about her." This child wanted the story told, Lily said, tears streaming down her face. They all did. Every child who left something here was leaving a testament, hoping someone would believe them. The bears watched as the humans prepared to leave. The younger bears looked to the original for guidance, and she made a sound they hadn't heard before, almost like a hum, melodic and soothing. The other bears joined in, creating a harmony that echoed through the cave. It wasn't quite singing, but it was intentional, structured, musical. Another impossibility to add to the growing list. That night, none of them slept well. The magnitude of what they'd discovered, the responsibility of sharing it with the world, the need to protect these remarkable creatures while honoring their work, it all weighed heavily. Dr. Chen spent the night reviewing her footage, still hardly believing what she'd captured. Lily wrote and rewrote her opening paragraphs, trying to find words that would make people believe the unbelievable. Ethan and Jessica prepared detailed reports for park management, knowing they were about to overturn decades of wildlife management policy. The next morning brought unexpected challenges. The little girl's rescue had indeed made the news, and reporters were arriving at the park in droves. The family, grateful but confused, was telling everyone about the bears who had saved their daughter. Most people assumed they were traumatized, confused, not thinking clearly. But some were starting to ask questions. The park superintendent, Marcus Webb, called an emergency meeting. Ethan and Jessica presented their findings, showing him the documentation they'd compiled over months. His initial skepticism gave way to amazement as he reviewed the evidence. "This is going to change everything," he said finally, "not just for our park, but for how we understand wildlife, intelligence, consciousness itself." They developed a careful plan. Dr. Chen would be given exclusive access to film a documentary, but under strict conditions that prioritized the bears' well-being. Lily would publish her story simultaneously with the documentary's release, providing written documentation to support the video evidence. The park would establish a protected zone around the cave systems, with limited, supervised access for researchers who passed strict ethical reviews. Most importantly, they would establish a support system for the bears' work. Instead of random supply drops, they would create hidden caches of medical supplies, updated regularly, placed where the bears could access them without human interaction. They would monitor the forest for lost hikers more carefully, potentially guiding them toward areas where the bears could help if needed. "We're not domesticating them," Jessica emphasized. "We're not making them dependent. We're just supporting a behavior they've developed on their own. They're choosing to save lives, and we're choosing to help them do it more effectively." The legal implications were staggering. The bears' behavior suggested a level of consciousness that could potentially afford them rights beyond those of typical wildlife. Legal scholars would later debate whether the bears' medical interventions constituted a form of practice that deserved protection and recognition. Some would argue that the bears had essentially become forest paramedics, deserving of the same respect and support given to human emergency responders. Dr. Chen spent the next 3 months embedded with the bears, filming their daily activities, their teaching sessions, their rescues. She captured footage that would later win every major documentary award, showing the bears conducting what could only be described as medical rounds, checking their supplies, practicing techniques on makeshift dummies they'd created from bundled vegetation. One sequence, which would become the most viewed wildlife footage in history, showed the original bear teaching a young bear how to take a pulse. Using her own wrist and then the younger bear's, she demonstrated where to feel for the heartbeat, how to count, how to recognize when the rhythm was too fast or too slow. The concentration on both bears' faces, the careful repetition until the student got it right, the obvious satisfaction when the skill was mastered. It was education in its purest form. Lily's investigative work uncovered more stories from the past 2 decades. She found hospital records of children who had survived impossible circumstances, many of whom had told stories of being helped by bears that were dismissed as hallucinations or trauma-induced fantasies. She interviewed dozens of these survivors, now adults, who broke down in tears when told their memories were real, that they hadn't imagined their rescue. One woman, now a pediatric nurse, revealed that her experience being saved by the bear as a child had inspired her career choice. "I was 7, lost for 3 days. Everyone thought I'd made up the story about the bear who fed me and kept me warm. But I knew it was real. I became a nurse because I wanted to save children the way that bear saved me." These human stories became a crucial part of the narrative, showing the long-term impact of the bear's intervention. Several survivors had gone into medical or rescue professions themselves, creating a ripple effect of compassion that spread far beyond the forest. The bears hadn't just saved lives. They'd inspired vocations, changed life paths, created a legacy of care that continued through human hands. The original bear seemed to understand that her story was being told. She became more comfortable with Dr. Chen's presence, even seeming to perform demonstrations specifically for the camera. One day, she led Dr. Chen to a part of the cave that had been hidden before, revealing what could only be described as a journal of sorts. Patterns of scratches and marks that corresponded to specific rescues, each with unique identifiers that seemed to record details about the person saved. "She's keeping records, Doctor," Chen reported in amazement. "Not just tallies, but actual case histories. Look, this mark pattern appears next to items from a rescue 5 years ago, and the same pattern is here, with what looks like an update. She's tracking the children she saved." A linguistics expert brought in to analyze the marks suggested they showed elements of symbolic representation beyond simple counting. The bears had developed a rudimentary writing system, abstract symbols that conveyed meaning. It was primitive compared to human writing, but sophisticated beyond anything previously documented in non-human species. The younger bears were developing their own territories now, establishing secondary rescue sites throughout the forest. They maintained connection with the original bear, meeting regularly in what appeared to be knowledge-sharing sessions. Dr. Chen filmed these gatherings, capturing what looked like case discussions, with bears using gestures and objects to communicate about recent rescues or challenges. One particularly moving scene showed a younger bear bringing a sick raccoon kit to the original bear. The older bear examined the tiny creature, then demonstrated how to help it, using the same gentle techniques she employed with human children. The lesson was clear. Compassion shouldn't be limited by species. The younger bear learned to help the raccoon, and later footage showed her maintaining a small section of her cave for helping injured wildlife, expanding the mission beyond just human rescue. As autumn arrived again, the documentary was nearing completion. Dr. Chen had captured hundreds of hours of footage, showing not just the rescues but the daily life of these extraordinary bears. She showed them foraging for food, maintaining their caves, teaching each other, and yes, sometimes just being bears, playing in streams, sunning themselves on rocks, enjoying the simple pleasures of wild life. "What's remarkable," she said in one of her recorded segments, "is that they haven't stopped being bears to become healers. They've integrated this compassionate behavior into their natural lives. They still hibernate, still forage, still do all the things bears do. They've just added this extraordinary dimension of interspecies care to their behavioral repertoire." The world's first glimpse of the story came through a carefully orchestrated release. Lily's article appeared simultaneously in major publications worldwide, accompanied by select photographs that Dr. Chen had taken. The headline was simple but powerful: "The Bears Who Became Doctors, a true story of interspecies compassion." The reaction was immediate and intense. Scientists demanded to see the evidence. Religious leaders proclaimed it a miracle. skeptics insisted it was an elaborate hoax. But as more evidence was released, as experts verified the footage and documentation, as survivors came forward with their stories, the truth became undeniable. The documentary premiered globally, translated into dozens of languages. Viewing parties were held in universities, conservation centers, and homes around the world. The image of the original bear gently treating a human baby became iconic, appearing on magazine covers, in textbooks, in art galleries. But more than fame, the story sparked a global conversation about consciousness, empathy, and the potential for connection between species. Conservation efforts received unprecedented support. The forest where the bears lived was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with strict protections that extended far beyond the bears' immediate territory. Funding poured in for wildlife research, particularly studies focused on animal intelligence and emotional capacity. The bears themselves seemed unaffected by their fame. They continued their work as they always had, saving lives with quiet efficiency. The support system that had been established made their work easier. They no longer had to search for medical supplies or rely on expired medications. Hidden cameras, placed with their permission, they had learned to recognize and ignore them, captured dozens more rescues over the following years. One rescue in particular captured the world's attention anew. A small plane had crashed in a remote part of the forest during a winter storm. The two survivors, both injured, had taken shelter in a cave, not knowing it was one of the bears' rescue stations. The footage showed 3 bears working together to treat the injured pilots, keeping them warm, managing their injuries, even setting a broken bone with remarkable precision. The bears maintained care for 5 days until rescue teams could reach the site through the heavy snow. The pilot's testimony was powerful. "They worked in shifts," one reported. "One bear was always with us while the others foraged for food or gathered firewood. Yes, firewood. They understood we needed fire for warmth and somehow figured out how to help us maintain one." They're not just intelligent, they're innovative problem solvers. Educational curricula worldwide were revised to include the story of the bears. Children learned about empathy through their example. Medical schools used the bears' systematic approach to triage and treatment as a case study in intuitive medicine. Philosophy departments debated the implications for our understanding of consciousness and moral agency. The original bear, now elderly by grisly standards, continued to teach. New generations of bears came to learn from her, not all choosing to become rescuers, but all exposed to the possibility. It became clear that she had created not just a behavior but a culture, a tradition that would outlast her individual life. Ethan, reflecting on the journey from that first shocking discovery to the global phenomenon it had become, often returned to the cave to sit quietly and watch the bears work. "They've taught us more than we ever taught them," he would say. "They've shown us that compassion isn't limited by species, that healing can transcend the boundaries we've created between human and animal, that sometimes the most profound intelligence is the one that chooses love over fear." Jessica established a veterinary program specifically designed to support the bears and study their methods. Young veterinarians came from around the world to learn, not just about the bears, but from them. Several medical techniques the bears had developed through trial and error were adapted for human emergency medicine, particularly in wilderness rescue situations. Lily won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting, but she continued to visit the forest regularly, documenting the ongoing story. She was there when the original bear, now very old, made her last rescue, a pair of twins who had wandered away from their family's campsite. Despite her age and frailty, she managed to keep them safe and warm through a cold night, her last act of interspecies motherhood. The bear passed away the following spring, surrounded by the bears she had taught and, at a respectful distance, the humans whose lives she had changed. The park held no official memorial. That seemed too human, too limiting for what she had been. Instead, people from around the world sent items to be placed in her cave. Medical supplies for the continuing work, toys from children she'd saved, letters of gratitude in dozens of languages. The work continued. The bears she had trained carried on the tradition, each adding their own innovations. One developed a system for water purification using charcoal and sand. Another learned to identify and treat allergic reactions. They evolved the practice while maintaining its core purpose, to save lives, regardless of species. Scientists studying the phenomenon identified genetic markers in the rescue bears that suggested enhanced neural connectivity in areas associated with empathy and problem-solving. Whether this was cause or effect remained debated. Had these bears always had the capacity for such behavior, waiting for the right trigger, or had the behavior itself somehow influenced their neural development? The question opened new fields of study in behavioral genetics and neuroplasticity. The cave became a pilgrimage site of sorts, though access remained strictly limited to protect the bears' work. A viewing platform was built at a distance, where people could observe without interfering. Many came hoping to glimpse the bears, but what they found was often more profound, a place where the boundary between human and nature had been not erased but transformed into something permeable, compassionate, and hopeful. Children who had been saved by the bears often returned as adults, bringing their own children to see the place where their lives had been preserved. These visits were carefully coordinated to avoid disrupting the bears, but when they occurred, something remarkable often happened. The bears would appear, not to interact directly but to observe, as if confirming that their work had been worthwhile, that the lives they'd saved had flourished. One such visit involved Sarah Mitchell, the baby from the car accident who had been one of the first documented rescues. Now, a young woman studying medicine, she stood at the viewing platform with tears streaming down her face. "I don't remember it," she said. "But I've always felt it. This sense that something extraordinary happened to me, that I was saved for a purpose. Seeing this place, knowing what happened here, it confirms what I've always felt in my heart." As she spoke, one of the bears appeared at the cave entrance. It wasn't the original bear, she had been gone for years, but one of her students, now a teacher herself. The bear looked directly at Sarah, tilted her head in that gesture of acknowledgement they had become known for, and then returned to her work. The connection across species and years was palpable, a thread of compassion linking past and future. The impact on conservation was transformational. The bear's story made it impossible to view wildlife as simply resources or obstacles. Countries worldwide strengthened protections for intelligent species. The criteria for consciousness was reconsidered, expanded to include demonstrations of empathy, altruism, and cultural transmission. The legal status of certain animals was elevated, recognizing them as beings with inherent rights rather than property. Research stations were established near other populations of intelligent animals, elephants, dolphins, great apes, looking for similar behaviors that might have been overlooked or dismissed. While nothing quite matched the systematic medical intervention of the rescue bears, other examples of interspecies altruism were documented, suggesting that the capacity for compassion beyond one's own kind might be more common than previously thought. The bears' influence extended into unexpected areas. Architects designed buildings inspired by the efficiency of the bears' cave organization. Educators developed teaching methods based on the bears' demonstration-based learning. Emergency responders adapted the bears' triage techniques for mass casualty events. The bears had become not just a biological phenomenon but a source of practical innovation. Dr. Chen produced several follow-up documentaries, each exploring different aspects of the bears' behavior and impact. One focused on the survivors, tracking how their rescue had influenced their life choices. Another examined the scientific implications, featuring debates between experts trying to understand how such behavior could have evolved. A third looked at the global conservation movement sparked by the bear's story. Each documentary revealed new facets of the phenomenon. The bears were shown to have individual personalities, preferences, and specialties. One was particularly good with infant care. Another excelled at treating injuries. A third had developed expertise in identifying edible plants that could serve as emergency food for lost hikers. They were not interchangeable units, but individuals contributing unique skills to a collective mission. The economic impact on the local area was significant, but carefully managed. Tourism increased, but strict regulations ensured it didn't interfere with the bears' work or the forest ecosystem. The nearby town became a center for conservation education, with museums, research facilities, and training centers that brought sustainable development without exploitation. Local indigenous communities, who had long spoken of the bears as special beings, found their traditional knowledge validated and valued. Elders told stories that suggested the behavior might not be entirely new, that their ancestors had spoken of healer bears, though the stories had been dismissed as mythology. The convergence of traditional knowledge and modern science created new frameworks for understanding animal consciousness. As technology advanced, new tools were developed to support the bears' work without direct interference. Drones monitored the forest for lost hikers, potentially guiding them toward rescue sites. Smart sensors detected medical emergencies and alerted both human rescue teams, and through subtle signals the bears learned to recognize the animal rescuers themselves. The collaboration between human technology and bear intuition created the world's most effective wilderness rescue system. The philosophical implications continued to ripple outward. If bears could choose to be healers, what did that say about free will in animals? If they could teach and learn complex medical procedures, what did that mean for our understanding of intelligence? If they could forgive the species that had killed their cubs and choose to save human children instead, what did that teach us about the nature of forgiveness and redemption? Universities established new interdisciplinary programs combining biology, philosophy, ethics, and medicine to study what became known as trans-species compassion. Students came from around the world to study not just the bears, but the broader implications of their behavior. Thesis papers were written on everything from the bears' impact on environmental law to their influence on pediatric emergency medicine. The bears themselves remained focused on their work, apparently unaware or unconcerned with their global impact. They continued to rescue lost hikers, treat injured children, and teach new generations of bears the art of healing. Each rescue was approached with the same careful attention, whether it was their first or their 100th, whether the world was watching or they worked in solitude. One particularly poignant rescue involved an elderly man with dementia who had wandered from a care facility. The bears found him confused and frightened, unable to understand where he was or what was happening. The footage showed remarkable patience as the bears slowly calmed him, provided warmth and food, and stayed with him for 3 days until rescuers arrived. The bears' gentle treatment of someone unable to understand or appreciate what was happening demonstrated that their compassion was unconditional, given freely without expectation of recognition or reward. The man's family was profoundly moved when they saw the footage. His daughter said, "My father spent his life as a doctor, helping others." To see him receive such care from these incredible beings when he was at his most vulnerable, It's like the universe was returning the compassion he'd given throughout his life. As the years passed, the rescue bears became a symbol of hope in an often divided world. Their story was cited in peace negotiations, used as an example that if bears could overcome their natural instincts and traumatic experiences to help another species, surely humans could overcome their differences. The image of the bear treating human children became a universal symbol of compassion, transcending boundaries. Environmental movements adopted the bears as icons, arguing that their behavior demonstrated the complex emotional and intellectual lives of animals deserving of protection. The phrase, "What would the rescue bears do?" became a touchstone for ethical decision-making, encouraging people to choose compassion over conflict, understanding over fear. The younger generation grew up with the bear's story as an established fact rather than an incredible discovery. For them, the idea that animals could be healers, teachers, and moral agents wasn't revolutionary but obvious. This shift in perspective promised even greater changes in how future generations would interact with the natural world. Research into the bear's behavior continued to yield surprises. They were observed developing new techniques, innovating solutions to medical challenges they encountered. When faced with a diabetic child in crisis, one bear figured out how to use honey to raise blood sugar, a technique she then taught to others. Their medical knowledge was not static but evolving, improving with each generation. The collaboration between species became more sophisticated. Veterinarians and doctors began leaving detailed medical guides in the supply caches, illustrated in ways the bears could understand. The bears, in turn, left their own communications, arrangements of objects that indicated what supplies they needed most, what medical challenges they were facing most frequently. This exchange of information led to breakthrough moments. When the bears indicated through their object language that they were seeing more hikers with breathing difficulties, researchers discovered an increase in a particular pollen that was causing severe allergic reactions. The warning from the bears led to public health advisories that prevented numerous medical emergencies. The bears' teaching methods were studied and adapted for human education. Their use of demonstration, repetition, and gradual complexity became a model for medical training. The patience they showed with slower learners, the way they adjusted their teaching to individual learning styles, provided insights into educational psychology that improved teaching methods worldwide. As the original bears' students aged, they too began to slow down, passing their knowledge to new generations. The tradition was now firmly established, no longer dependent on any individual bear. It had become part of the forest's culture, as integral to the ecosystem as the trees and streams. The spot where the original bear was buried became a place of quiet reflection. No marker identified it. That seemed too human, but those who knew could feel the significance of the place. Bears and humans alike would pause there, not in organized ceremony but in spontaneous moments of remembrance. Scientists estimated that over the 50 years since the original bear began her work, the rescue bears had saved over 300 lives directly and influenced countless more through the medical knowledge gained from observing their techniques. Each life saved created ripples, families kept whole, children who grew up to make their own contributions, a web of connection and consequence that demonstrated how individual actions could change the world. The story took on mythic proportions while remaining grounded in documented fact. Children's books, novels, films, and songs celebrated the bears, but always with the reminder that this was not fantasy but reality. A reality that suggested the world was far more magical than most had dared to believe. Religious and spiritual communities found deep meaning in the bear's story. Some saw it as proof of divine intervention, others as evidence of the interconnectedness of all life. the bears became bridges between different belief systems, their actions speaking a universal language of compassion that transcended doctrinal differences. The economic model that developed around the bears became a template for conservation efforts worldwide. It showed that protecting wildlife and supporting local communities weren't mutually exclusive, but could be mutually reinforcing. The carefully managed tourism, research facilities, and educational programs created sustainable income while maintaining the integrity of the bears' work and habitat. As climate change altered the forest, the bears adapted their rescue strategies. They established new caves at different elevations, adjusted to changing patterns of human recreation, and even seemed to anticipate weather events that might lead to emergencies. Their adaptability demonstrated that intelligence wasn't just about solving current problems, but anticipating and preparing for future challenges. The legal precedents established by the bears' case influenced legislation worldwide. Rights of nature laws were passed recognizing certain animals as persons under the law, with legal standing and protections. The bears had changed not just hearts and minds, but legal systems, creating new frameworks for coexistence between humans and wildlife. Technological advances allowed for even more detailed study of the bear's behavior. Neural imaging, adapted for use in the field, showed activation patterns in the bears' brains during rescue operations that mirrored those seen in human medical professionals during patient care. The similarity suggested that the emotional and cognitive processes underlying compassionate care might be universal, not uniquely human. The bears' influence on human medicine continued to grow. Their intuitive understanding of triage, their ability to remain calm in crisis, their patient-centered approach became teaching points in medical schools. Think like a rescue bear became advice given to young doctors, encouraging them to see beyond symptoms to the whole patient, to combine technical knowledge with intuitive care. As the story entered its second generation, with bears who had never known the original founder continuing the work, it became clear that something permanent had changed in the relationship between humans and nature. The forest was no longer just a wilderness to be preserved or exploited, but a partner in the shared project of life on Earth. The viewing platform near the caves became a place where people came not just to potentially see the bears, but to reflect on what their existence meant. Many reported profound experiences there, not supernatural, but deeply natural. A sense of connection to something larger, a reminder that humans were not separate from nature but part of it. Children who had been saved by the bears often became advocates for conservation, their personal stories carrying weight that statistics never could. They spoke at conferences, wrote books, led movements, all carrying forward the message that the natural world was not just valuable, but invaluable, not just important, but irreplaceable. The bear's story challenged anthropocentric worldviews that placed humans at the pinnacle of creation. If bears could be doctors, if they could teach and learn and choose compassion over instinct, then the hierarchy that justified human dominance over nature needed reconsidering. The result was a more humble, more integrated understanding of humanity's place in the world. Research expanded to look for similar behaviors in other species, and while nothing quite matched the systematic medical intervention of the rescue bears, examples of complex altruism were found everywhere researchers looked. Dolphins supporting injured swimmers, elephants protecting human children who had fallen into their enclosures, even birds warning humans of approaching predators. The natural world was full of examples of interspecies cooperation that had been overlooked or dismissed. The bears became symbols in the climate movement, their story demonstrating that nature was not passive but active, not just affected by human actions but capable of response, adaptation, and yes, forgiveness. They showed that conservation was not about preserving a static natural world, but about maintaining relationships, supporting the evolution of new forms of coexistence. As the documentary's 10th anniversary approached, Dr. Chen returned to film a retrospective. She found a thriving community of rescue bears, now numbering over 20 individuals spread across the forest. Each had their own territory, their own specialty, but they maintained connection through regular gatherings that had become increasingly sophisticated in their information exchange. The retrospective included interviews with dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the bears. Not just those who had been rescued, but researchers, conservationists, local residents, and people around the world who had found inspiration in their story. The common thread was transformation. The bears had changed not just individual lives, but entire worldviews. One interview was particularly moving. A man who had been rescued as a child had become a paramedic, inspired by his experience. He had recently saved a life using a technique he'd learned from studying footage of the bears' rescue methods. "They saved me, which inspired me to save others, and their techniques helped me do it better," he said. "It's a chain of compassion that started with a grieving bear choosing love over loss."